When the Russia-Ukraine conflict began 4 years ago, few anticipated it would become the bloodiest war in Europe since World War II. The numbers that have emerged paint a staggering picture of human loss on both sides. As of early 2026, combined casualties for both nations are estimated to approach 2 million people. That's not a typo. 2 million soldiers killed, wounded, or missing in a war that many thought would be over in days. But the true death toll may be even worse than we realize. So, why are the actual numbers so hard to pin down? Well, let's start at the beginning. When Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24, 2022, both Moscow and Kyiv were tight-lipped about their losses. Russia characterized the operation as a special military operation and insisted that casualties were minimal. Ukraine, fighting for its survival, had every reason to keep its numbers close to its chest to avoid demoralizing its population and military. By the end of 2022, Western intelligence agencies began releasing estimates that shocked many observers. The United States assessed that Russia had suffered somewhere between 100,000 and 120,000 casualties in the first 10 months of fighting alone, which includes both killed and wounded. Ukraine's losses were estimated to be similar during the same period. These were numbers not seen in European conflicts since the massive battles of World War II. But 2023 would prove even deadlier. As the war settled into a grinding attritional struggle, casualty rates actually accelerated. The British Ministry of Defence estimated in early 2023 that Russia was losing around 700 soldiers per day, somewhere between 200 and 300 more than in 2022. That's the equivalent of an additional battalion being wiped out every 3 to 4 days. By mid-2023, US officials were estimating that combined casualties for both sides had already surpassed 500,000 people. 500,000 human beings were killed or wounded in just over a year of fighting. The battle for Bakhmut alone, which raged from August 2022 through May 2023, is the perfect example of just how much death was in the conflict. Russia's Wagner Group mercenaries, many of them recruited directly from prisons, were sent in wave after wave to overwhelm Ukrainian positions. The tactic worked eventually, but at a horrific cost. Conservative estimates suggest Russia lost over 20,000 men just to capture a single city that had limited strategic value. Then came 2024, and the bloodshed intensified even further. Russia shifted to what military analysts call meat grinder tactics. Small squads of poorly trained soldiers will be sent forward to probe Ukrainian defenses, drawing fire and revealing positions. Artillery and drones would then hammer those positions before the next wave of infantry advanced. It was brutally effective at identifying targets, but it consumed Russian manpower at an alarming rate. By April 2025, then Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Christopher Cavoli, estimated that Russia had suffered more than 790,000 killed or injured. The British Ministry of Defence put the number even higher, at over 1 million casualties by June 2025. The discrepancy in these estimates is due to ample challenges in tracking casualties. Neither side is willing to provide exactly accurate information, and different methodologies produce different results. Ukraine's losses, while smaller in absolute numbers, were proportionally devastating given its much smaller population and military. President Zelensky stated in February 2025 that over 46,000 Ukrainian soldiers had been killed, with 380,000 wounded. However, he noted that approximately half of the wounded had recovered and returned to active duty, which complicated the casualty count even further. Now we're in 2026, 4 full years into the conflict, and the numbers have become truly astronomical. According to a comprehensive analysis published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, in late January 2026, Russia has suffered approximately 1.2 million casualties since February 2022. That includes between 275,000 and 325,000 killed in action. In 2025 alone, Russia lost roughly 415,000 soldiers, averaging nearly 35,000 casualties per month. December 2024 actually marked Russia's deadliest month of the entire war, with an average of 1,570 casualties per day. Ukraine's total casualties are estimated at between 500,000 and 600,000, with 100,000 to 140,000 killed. That means the combined death and injury toll for both nations is hovering somewhere around 1.8 million people. At current rates, CSIS predicts that number will cross 2 million by spring 2026. To put these numbers in perspective, Russia's battlefield fatalities in Ukraine are more than 17 times greater than Soviet losses in Afghanistan during the entire 1980s. They're 11 times greater than Russia's casualties during both Chechen wars combined. In fact, Russia has lost more soldiers in Ukraine than it did in all conflicts combined since World War II. And no major power has suffered anywhere near these casualty numbers in any war since 1945. But here's where things get murky. These are estimates, not confirmed numbers, and there's a reason for that. Both Russia and Ukraine have strong incentives to manipulate the narrative around casualties. Russia wants to convince its population that the special military operation is going according to plan and that losses are acceptable. Meanwhile, Ukraine needs to maintain Western support and domestic morale, which means carefully managing the flow of information about its own losses. Russia's approach has been systematic suppression. The Kremlin classifies all military casualty data as state secrets. Independent journalists who report on losses face up to 15 years in prison. Even using the word war instead of special military operation can result in prosecution. Major independent media outlets like Echo Moskwa and Dost were shut down early in the conflict. Foreign agent laws have effectively silenced most investigative reporting. The Russian government controls the narrative through state-run media and extensive bot networks. They frequently inflate Ukrainian casualties while drastically underreporting their own. For example, in December 2024, a source from Russia's Ministry of Defense claimed that Ukraine had suffered almost 1 million casualties, while Russia itself had lost only a fraction of that number. These claims are demonstrably false, but they showcase Russia's willingness to ignore the truth for political gains. President Vladimir Putin has framed the war as a continuation of the Great Patriotic War against Nazi Germany, leveraging historical trauma to justify current losses. This narrative resonates with many Russians who remember the 27 million Soviet citizens who died defeating Hitler. If their grandfathers could sustain those losses to defeat fascism, then by Putin's logic, modern Russia can accept casualties to defeat Ukrainian Nazis. The Kremlin also spends enormous sums on compensation payments to families of dead and wounded soldiers. In 2024 alone, Russia allocated over 1.2 trillion rubles, roughly $15.3 billion, for these payments. This serves a dual purpose. It provides financial support to families who might otherwise protest the war, and it allows the government to track casualty numbers internally while keeping them hidden from the public. Ukraine's approach is more nuanced. Kyiv initially kept casualty figures tightly controlled to prevent Russia from gaining intelligence advantages. But as the war dragged on, Ukraine found itself in a difficult position. It needed to demonstrate to Western allies that it was using donated weapons effectively, which meant publicizing Russian casualties. At the same time, revealing its own losses too freely could undermine recruitment efforts and public support. Ukrainian officials have been accused of inflating Russian casualties to demonstrate battlefield success. The daily tallies released by Ukraine's general staff consistently show higher Russian losses than most Western intelligence agencies believe plausible. For instance, Ukraine claimed Russia lost over 1,247,000 troops by late December 2025, a number that aligns with some Western estimates but may include wounded soldiers who returned to duty multiple times. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky himself has been careful about releasing Ukrainian casualty figures. He waited until February 2024, 2 years into the war, before publicly stating that 31,000 Ukrainian soldiers had been killed. Even then, many analysts believe this number was significantly understated. When he updated the figure to 46,000 killed in February 2025, it still seemed conservative compared to Western intelligence estimates. The truth is that accurately counting casualties in modern warfare is extraordinarily difficult. Soldiers go missing and may be prisoners, deserters, or killed in action, with their bodies never recovered. Wounded soldiers may return to duty multiple times, making it unclear whether they should be counted as one casualty or several. Russia's practice of recruiting prisoners adds another layer of complexity, as these soldiers often lack proper documentation. Independent verification efforts have tried to fill the gap. Mediazona, working with BBC's Russian service and a team of volunteers, has compiled a named list of Russian military dead by scouring social media posts, local news reports, and government websites. As of January 13, 2026, they had confirmed 163,606 Russian deaths by name. But they openly acknowledged this represents only a fraction of total losses, as many families never publicly announced deaths, and Russian authorities actively work to suppress this information. The most troubling revelation came in late 2025, when it emerged that Russian courts had been filing tens of thousands of lawsuits to declare soldiers missing or dead. By early December 2025, Mediazona had identified approximately 88,000 such court claims. Then, on December 26, 2025, Russian courts began systematically deleting these records from public databases. Defense Minister Andrei Belousov inadvertently revealed the scale of the problem when he stated that 48% of the total number of missing persons, every second person, had been found. If roughly 90,000 lawsuits represent half of all missing soldiers, that suggests there are at least 180,000 bodies left unrecovered on Ukrainian battlefields. But if Russia is losing soldiers at this catastrophic rate, where are all these men coming from? Well, before we dig into that, a reminder that the Military Show is publishing new videos every day. So, if you like in-depth analyses like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Now, to understand the true scale of casualties, we need to look at the numbers before and after, which reveals something that's practically unique to this conflict. Russia has essentially burned through its entire pre-war professional military force and has transitioned to a mass mobilization army. When Russia began its invasion in February 2022, it deployed roughly 190,000 soldiers. These were supposed to be Russia's best: professional contract soldiers, elite airborne units, Spetsnaz special forces. The plan was for a rapid advance to seize Kyiv and decapitate the Ukrainian government within days or weeks. Well, we know how that turned out. By mid-2022, Putin could either admit defeat or double down. He chose the latter. In September 2022, Russia announced a partial mobilization of 300,000 reservists. In practice, this mobilization disproportionately targeted ethnic minorities and men from Russia's poorest regions, the Far East, Siberia, and the North Caucasus. Minority groups ended up suffering casualty rates far exceeding their population percentages. But even 300,000 new soldiers weren't enough to replace the losses. So, Russia turned to increasingly desperate measures. Prisoners, including convicted murderers and rapists, were offered freedom in exchange for 6 months of combat service. The Wagner Group alone recruited over 48,000 convicts from Russian prisons, many of whom were sent into the meat grinder at Bakhmut. Those who survived their contracts came home as heroes, only for many to commit new crimes and re-enlist to avoid prosecution. By 2024, Russia had created what amounts to a permanent war economy centered around recruitment. Regional governments compete to meet monthly recruitment quotas, offering signing bonuses that reached as high as $40,000 in some areas. This is life-changing money in regions where average monthly salaries hover around $500. For many Russians, especially those from economically depressed areas, military service became the only path to financial stability. According to official Russian figures, the military recruited 540,000 new contract soldiers in 2023 and another 427,000 in 2024. In 2025, that number dropped to approximately 417,000. But these aren't the professional soldiers Russia deployed in February 2022. Most receive only 3 to 4 weeks of basic training before being sent to the front lines. They're learning to operate in modern drone-saturated battlefields while under fire, rather than in controlled training environments. That difference in quality and experience is costing Russia the war. The pre-war army had junior officers who understood combined arms operation, proper use of artillery support, and how to coordinate air and ground forces. Many of those are now dead, considering that close to 6,500 Russian officers had been confirmed killed, with more than half being junior officers, lieutenants, senior lieutenants, and captains. New officers are being rushed through abbreviated training programs, often with as little as 2 months of officer training before taking command of troops. They're learning on the job, and their soldiers are paying the price for their inexperience. The result is a Russian military that looks nothing like the force that invaded Ukraine in 2022. It's larger in raw numbers, as Putin claims to have 700,000 troops in Ukraine as of late 2025, but it's qualitatively degraded. Units rely on brute force and numerical superiority rather than tactical sophistication. Artillery support has become less precise. Communications are frequently compromised. Logistics remains a persistent weakness. US intelligence estimates that Russia is recruiting approximately 30,000 to 40,000 new soldiers per month as of early 2026. That's just barely enough to replace losses and maintain current operations. It's not enough to support major offensive breakthroughs or rapid advances. Russia is essentially in a recruitment death spiral, where it has to constantly replenish its forces just to maintain the status quo. Adding to Russia's problems is the equipment situation. While Moscow has managed to maintain a steady supply of basic equipment like rifles and uniforms, heavy weaponry is becoming increasingly scarce. According to several Western intelligence assessments, Russia lost more than 4,300 main battle tanks by late 2025, more than its entire pre-war active inventory. It's been forced to reactivate Soviet-era T-55 and T-62 tanks from deep storage, some dating back to the 1960s. These ancient tanks are being crewed by hastily trained recruits and sent into battle against modern Ukrainian anti-tank weapons. The results are predictable. Russia's manufacturing capacity can't produce new main battle tanks fast enough to replace battlefield losses. Most of the new tanks entering service are actually decades-old vehicles pulled from storage, refurbished, and sent to the front. The same pattern holds for infantry fighting vehicles, artillery systems, and armored personnel carriers. Western intelligence analysts predict that by late 2026 or early 2027, Russia will face a critical shortage of armored vehicles if the current rate of attrition continues. So why, given all these problems, hasn't Russia's military collapsed? And why, despite suffering more than twice Ukraine's casualties, is Russia still making territorial gains? The answer comes down to simple mathematics and strategic geography. Russia has a population of approximately 144 million people, compared to Ukraine's 37 million before the war. That's nearly a 4-to-1 advantage in raw numbers. Russia has approximately 18.9 million military-age males between 20 and 39, compared to Ukraine's 5 million in the same age bracket. Even with horrific casualties, Russia can theoretically sustain a war of attrition longer than Ukraine can. Every Ukrainian soldier killed or wounded is proportionally more damaging to Ukraine's fighting capacity than a Russian soldier is to Russia's. Russia has leveraged this by sacrificing its soldiers in exchange for incremental territorial gains. Since taking the initiative in early 2024, CSIS estimated Russian forces have advanced at an average rate of between 50 and 200 feet per day in major offensives. That's slower than the Battle of the Somme in World War I, one of history's most notoriously bloody campaigns. But Russia doesn't need rapid advances, it just needs to outlast Ukraine. Every month the war continues, Ukraine loses more of its limited manpower pool. Every casualty Ukraine suffers is harder to replace than a Russian one. Moscow bets that eventually, Ukraine will run out of soldiers willing to fight, or Western support will waver, or both. Yet Russia's supposed advantage in manpower hasn't translated to battlefield success in the way Putin's generals anticipated. And there are several reasons why. First, Ukraine's defense-in-depth strategy has proven extraordinarily effective at multiplying Russian casualties. Ukrainian forces have constructed elaborate trench systems, anti-tank obstacles, and minefields that channel Russian advances into kill zones. When Russian infantry attempt to storm these positions, they're hit by artillery, mortars, and increasingly by swarms of first-person view drones that can deliver precise strikes on individual soldiers. The drone saturation of the battlefield has also fundamentally changed the calculus of warfare. At 10 miles of the front line, vehicle movement has become nearly suicidal due to constant drone surveillance. Second, Russia's centralized command structure has proven catastrophically inflexible. Local commanders lack the authority to make tactical adjustments without approval from higher headquarters. This creates delays that Ukrainian forces exploit ruthlessly. By the time Russian units receive permission to change their approach, Ukrainian defenders have already adapted. Third, Russia's logistics systems remains fundamentally broken. Ammunition gets through, fuel arrives eventually, but coordination between different types of units is poor. Artillery support is often poorly synchronized with infantry advances. Air support, when it comes, isn't effectively integrated with ground operations. The combined arms competence that Russian doctrine supposedly emphasizes has largely failed to materialize. Fourth, morale is a persistent problem. Soldiers recruited with cash bonuses and rushed to the front line with minimal training don't fight with the same motivations as Ukrainians defending their homeland. Russian units have suffered from mass surrenders, particularly during Ukraine's incursion into the Kursk Oblast, where over 1,000 Russian soldiers were captured in the first few months of operations. The Kursk offensive illustrates just how badly Russia has been faring when it comes to meaningful strategy and logistics. When Ukraine invaded Russian territory in August 2024, it took Russia over a month to organize a counterattack. Moscow was forced to pull units from other sectors of the front, creating temporary vulnerabilities that Ukraine exploited. Russia even resorted to deploying approximately 11,000 North Korean troops to help retake its own territory. The fundamental problem is that Russia is fighting a 20th century war of attrition in a 21st century battle space. Its advantages in manpower and industrial capacity are being systematically negated by Ukrainian tactical innovation, Western technological support, and the revolution in drone warfare. Ukraine, despite having far fewer soldiers and less equipment, has consistently out-innovated its larger opponent. Ukrainian forces pioneered the use of commercial drones modified for military purposes. They developed electronic warfare systems that can corrupt Russian navigation signals. They improved fiber-optic controlled drones that are immune to jamming. They've turned consumer electronics into precision-guided weapons. At the same time, Russia is becoming a second-tier power even as it exhausts itself trying to conquer a neighbor. Its economy is under severe strain. Manufacturing is declining. Inflation remains stubbornly high. Economic growth slowed to 0.6% in 2025. The defense industry faces critical shortages of components, many of which have been imported from the West before sanctions took effect. The true death toll of the Ukraine war is the erasure of futures, the destruction of potential, the permanent scarring of two nations. Whether the final count is 1.5 million, 2 million, or more, each number represents a human being who will never go home. That's the real cost of this war, and it's a price that both Russia and Ukraine continue to pay every single day. Thanks for watching. Now, if you want to learn more about how Russia has fundamentally changed since the invasion began, check out this video. And to stay informed about the Russia-Ukraine conflict and global geopolitics, subscribe to The Military Show for daily updates.